What's up, VC? Bobby B here, and guess what? It's the final countdown. Top 10. We're here in the top 10 of all time. Only took a year to get there. And here we are. You can't play more than that because then they take my video down, I think. Because I think that's a song that's probably covered. Anyway, guys, here we are, top 10. Here, I'm just gonna, shut that Spotify off there. Yeah, I don't know if the setup was worth it, but there you go. Take it off. Oh my lordy. Cancel. Close. No, we're not shutting off. Okay. Anyways, guys, here we are, top 10 albums of all time. We've made it. Thank you again. Like I say every time, many have kind of cut out for now. And many of you have stuck around. So those who have stuck around, it's nice to see you. Thank you. And we're going to run through my top 10 favorite albums of all time as of the time that this list was composed. It's been a little while now, to be honest. There'll probably be a lot of changes at this point. I don't know, but anyway, here we are. So, to reiterate, this is my opinion. There are going to be some here that you are pretty unique to my list. There are going to be some here everybody talks about. There are going to be some here that everybody in the VC talks about. It's just, it's the way it goes. But these are my 10 favorite albums. And for some of the ones that maybe you already know or you're already familiar with, I'll try to somehow relate why I love the album so much. In most cases, with a couple of exceptions, these are albums that I've just loved for such a significant part of my life and that for whatever reason I just never grow tired of. A lot of bands, Genesis, the Beatles, Pink Floyd, these are a lot of artists that, these are artists that I listen to so much through the years. They've all released albums that I love. Some of them are represented in this top 10, but a lot of the stuff that would have made my list at one time, I just find don't listen to as much anymore, and so they don't make the list. But as you get to the higher reaches here, as you get to the top 5, you're getting to albums that I've listened to 80 billion times, and I still pull them out at least, a few times a year. So that's what we're doing. I'm wearing a toque today because, it's been really cold here in Toronto. It's been, we were reaching some minus 30, minus 35 degree temperatures there. That's downright unnatural. But anyways, here we go. So my number 10 album of all time was released June 21st, 1990. It's, I'll just show it to you. It is this album here. It is by a band named Uncle Tupelo, and the album is called No Depression. Uncle Tupelo consists of Jay Farrar and Jeff Tweedy, along with some other musicians. Now, Jay Farrar went on to have a solo career as well as a project called Sunvolt, which is highly respected in what they call the alt-country community. Jeff Tweedy, well, many of you know who Jeff Tweedy is. He went on to form Wilco, who is a band that started out as well respected in the alt-country community and went on to become even more well respected in just regular kind of indie rock alternative circles. Their albums have ranged from very simple acoustic and folky to sort of jangle pop type stuff to even more, kind of out there and experimental progressive albums. But this here is where it started. And this here, for the 90s, this influenced, it came out in 1990 and it influenced so much that came out after it. Depending on who you ask, this is the original alt-country album. Now, I know you can kind of go back to the Byrds and Mike Nesmith and things like that, Graham Parsons, as kind of the originators of alt-country. Heck, you could go right back to Johnny Cash if you want. But, for the modern day kind of alt-country movement, a lot of people will kind of look to Uncle Tupelo as kind of the grandfathers of that. The alt-country magazine is entitled No Depression, named after this album. and it's just an amazing, amazing collection of songs. This is my Nevermind. You know, people, you know, Nevermind, Nirvana's Nevermind is considered kind of the pinnacle of 90s influential music. Well, if we're talking about my personal taste, this is my Nevermind. Uncle Tupelo's No Depression. And how can I describe it? I mean, it's obviously alt country, but it's got some pretty heavy riffs to it. It can get quite heavy at times. I mean, think of, you know, Graham Parsons or Johnny Cash singing lead for Dinosaur Jr. I think that's kind of a good comparison there. Very important album in my life. If I were to recommend a couple of songs, I would recommend the first song, Graveyard Shift. It's a rocker. And then, you know, something like Whiskey Bottle or even the title track, Screen Door, is another song, which are a lot more country, folk tinged, but that is my number 10 album of all time. Number 9. Okay, where are we here? Number 9 is an album that was released in 1978. It is on the ever-popular ECM label. It is my favorite album released on that label, and it is Steve Reich's Music for 18 Musicians. This album is composed of one lengthy instrumental piece. ECM, as we know, is a jazz label, so I suppose it falls into that category, although I think it probably falls more into a classical category. Classical, jazz, certainly a bit of avant-garde. I would even say, you know, progressive, electronica, even though it's kind of more, you know, sort of earthy instruments than you know, most electronica albums, but it's based on a cycle. As it says here, the structure of the piece is based on a cycle of 11 chords played at the very beginning of the piece and repeated at the end. All of the instruments and voices play or sing pulsing notes within each chord, and it says instruments like the strings, which do not have to breathe, nevertheless follow the rise and fall of the breath by following the breath patterns of the bass clarinet, so on and so forth. It's just an amazing piece of music. You can find it, you can see it performed live on YouTube. I want to say it's in Japan, don't quote me on that. I think it's live in Japan, but it's amazing to watch live. And Steve Reich has even gone on record as saying that really you should have more. It's 18 musicians on record because you can do that, but live, you know, it's very hard to even keep it to only 18 musicians. It's a piece of music that just sucks me in every time I listen to it. I find it captivating. I'm big on that kind of thing. There's a lot of albums out there. There's a band out these days. They're called the Necks, out of Australia. Necks, out of Australia. They tend to do albums that are just one kind of lengthy instrumental piece of music. They carry on that sort of tradition. You've got stuff like Tubular Bells and so on, but this is kind of the pinnacle of all of those, and I really, really enjoy it. This cover here is kind of neat. I'm pretty sure it's not one. In fact, I guarantee it's not one of those magic eye things, but every once in a while I try and see if it is, because it sort of looks like it should be, doesn't it? Anyway, Steve Reich, Music for 18 Musicians, is my number 9 album of all time. At number 8, we have an album that was released October 10th, 1969. And it's often been referred to as the Frank Zappa album for people who don't like Frank Zappa. It is a solo Frank Zappa album. It's not Mothers of Invention, but you know, the two are kind of interchangeable during this period. It's technically his second solo album after Lumpy Gravy. But this is just an amazing, mostly instrumental jazz fusion record. The only vocals are on the song Willie the Pimp, and you've got Captain Beefheart singing on that, but the rest of it is an amazing instrumental album. Some of the greatest musicians of all time perform on this. Shuggie Otis, Sugar Cane Harris, Jean-Luc Ponty on violin. Just an amazing, if you like that kind of jazz fusion type stuff. I mean, you know this album. I think everybody in the vinyl community knows this album. Frank Zappa's Hot Rats. I cannot recommend this album enough. Just an absolute masterpiece. I would recommend the song Peaches on Regalia, one of my favorite songs of all time, and it's nice and concise too. In fact, it and Little Umbrellas are the only short pieces. Everything else is a little bit lengthy on this album. Son of Mr. Green Jeans really showcases Jean-Luc Ponty's violin playing in a crazy light. It's crazy. Frank Zappa, Hot Rats, number 8. Number 7, album of all time. I'm going to take a sip of coffee, if you don't mind. Number 7 was released in June 1986. My favorite album of the 80s. Really needs no introduction. This band has performed on, or has appeared on my list earlier with their self-titled debut. But this here is a Stone classic. It is the Smiths. The Queen is Dead. Morrissey and Marr never sounded better than they do here, but you know what? You got to give props to the whole band because the others, boy, that's embarrassing, eh? You took the rest of the band deserves our respect. I have no idea what their names are. Andy Rourke on bass, Mike Joyce on the drums. The rhythm section is tight on here too. In fact, you hear it a lot in the song "Vicar in a Tutu." This album is hilarious and depressing. It's just wonderful. A Stone classic. Also one of the greatest songs of all time. There is a Light That Never Goes Out. One of the top 10 songs of all time, in my humble opinion. IMHO. The opening track almost starts out with almost kind of a Rolling Stones type of well, it starts with that pulsating drum after Take Me Back to Dear Old Blighty. There's that drum that kicks in. Then you just got some great rock and roll riffs, which is something you don't think of when you hear the Smiths, but great rock and roll riffs to open the album with The Queen is Dead. Goes into Frankly Mr. Shankly, which is an expose, if you will, of the music industry, a scathing expose of the music industry, but it's absolutely hilarious. Jaunty little tune. Then you get the 1-2 punch of I Know It's Over, Never Had No One Ever, two of the saddest freaking songs I've ever heard. Cemetery Gates, a song that should be depressing when you read the lyrics, but it's really about poetry, and it's about the joys of, you know, visiting the cemetery gates. Such a happy tune. Another sunny day, so let's go where we're happy, and I'll meet you at the cemetery gates. You've got Big Mouth Strikes Again, hilarious. The Boy with a Thorn in His Side, Vicar in a Tutu, There's a Light That Never Goes Out. Some Girls Are Bigger Than Others, which Johnny Marr has always kind of hated, that his beautiful melody was used as a delivery service for the lyrics that Morrissey wrote there. Just a wonderfully well-rounded album. I wouldn't want it any other way. The Smiths, The Queen is Dead, is my number 7 album of all time. At number 6, this album was released in... Come on, guys. What is going on here? My apologies, kids. There we go. August 1972. This is my number 6 album of all time. It is Big Star's number 1 record. They were not big stars when this was released, and this album did not get anywhere close to being a number 1 record. But it has gone on to influence everybody. It was critically acclaimed at the time. The critics loved it, but it took a while for the public to catch on. You know, Beatlesque, jangle pop songs were not the order of the day back in 1972. People were listening to prog back then, and there was nothing other than perhaps the song, the India song. There wasn't really much prog on this. That's not a prog song, but I mean, I'm just kind of grasping. That's the closest to prog that this album gives you. But my goodness, some of the best melodies ever written. Side 1 is Killer Feel. The Ballad of El Goodo, In the Street, which became the theme song to the 70s show. 13, which has been covered by countless other artists. It's one of the most beautiful songs ever. Don't Lie to Me rocks. When My Baby's Beside Me rocks. My Life Is Right is beautiful. Watch the Sunrise is perhaps my favorite song on the album, next to 13. Big Star, Alex Chilton, Chris Bell, Jody Stevens, Andy Hummel, gone on to influence every Django pop, power pop artist that's come out since then. Masterpiece, absolute masterpiece. It's my number 6 album of all time. We're getting into the top 5. Here we go. Number 5, this ain't gonna surprise anybody. Although I've heard there are naysayers when it comes to this album on both in the vinyl community and elsewhere. There are people who feel it's overrated. May 16th, 1966, this album was released. It is the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds. One of the most beautiful albums ever recorded. I don't need to talk too much about this one, but I will say, just in my personal opinion, if you're going to put the Beach Boys up against the Beatles, to me there's no comparison. I mean, the Beatles, hands down. But that having been said, I don't feel like the Beatles have ever released a single album as powerful or as beautiful as this one. I think this is just perfect in every way. It's the happiest sad album I've ever heard. I got to see Brian Wilson in concert last year, and he was kind of doing a double tour. He was doing a Greatest Hits tour and a Pet Sounds tour, and he came to Toronto on the Greatest Hits tour. And I thought, well, you know what, I don't know how many chances I'm going to get to see Brian Wilson, so I'm going to get tickets to that. I was saddened initially that it wasn't the Pet Sounds concert, it was the Greatest Hits. But then, to my surprise, first of all, when we got there, we had nosebleed seats up in the balcony, but when we got there, they upgraded us to orchestra level seats. And then, when he did Wouldn't It Be Nice, which I was expecting, even on a Greatest Hits tour, you're going to do Wouldn't It Be Nice. I was like, well, that's, so I was enjoying that. Then he followed that up with You Still Believe in Me, and I was like, ooh, that's a nice addition. Thank you for including that, Sir Brian Wilson. And then he followed that up with That's Not Me, and that's when my eyebrows started to perk up, and I was like, wait a second, what is he doing? Well, by the time Don't Talk, Put Your Head on My Shoulder came on, the waterworks were coming down. They performed Pet Sounds in its entirety in the middle of their Greatest Hits set. It was, oh my goodness, it was a concert experience I'll never forget. God Only Knows, live, it just doesn't get better than that. It's my number 5 album of all time. Number 4 was released December 1968, and it is the debut album by The Soft Machine. Soft Machine, I mean, I don't know, first of all, what kind of music is this? I don't even know what to tell you. It's psychedelic, it's prog, it's jazz, fusion, it's avant-garde. The Soft Machine went on to more of a jazz fusion territory as their albums continued to be released. By their third and fourth album, that they were solidly in that category. But this here is just such a scattered album that every time I listen to it, still after so many years, there are certain things that still surprise me about this record. It's just amazing. I'd still like to get, I used to have a copy of this, like an older copy of this, but I don't know what happened to it. This is the Sundays reissue. I think it sounds really good, but I'd still like to get an older pressing of this. But yeah, the Soft Machine's debut album. That's my number 4. I don't even know what to recommend. I recommend the whole album. With these albums that we got coming up now, I just recommend the whole thing because they're all so great. That's my number 4. My number 3 album of all time was released in August 1967. It is the debut album by Pink Floyd, The Piper at the Gates of Dawn. Yeah, I know. Is this album better than Dark Side of the Moon? Is it better than The Wall? Is it better than Wish You Were Here? Metal. I don't know. All I know is I listened to so much Pink Floyd, and that stuff in particular, when I was in my teens and 20s, that I kind of OD'd on the Pink Floyd a little bit. And I still love those albums, and I'll still play them, and I still think they're great. But I just found as I was compiling this top 100, they just kept getting pushed down on the list because I just didn't feel like them as much as I felt like some others. And yet this one just kept climbing. Like every time I listened to it and spun it, it just kept climbing and climbing. It's easily the Pink Floyd album I listen to the most these days. If you're going to ask me what my favorite Pink Floyd album is at the moment, it's this one. It's just the one I feel like listening to. And this is my list. So not only is it my favorite Pink Floyd album for now, but it's also, my third favorite album of all time at the moment. Pink Floyd, The Piper at the Gates of Dawn. Syd Barrett is all over this thing, obviously. This was his baby. Astronomy Domine is the first song on the album. You've got so many kind of catchier sort of psych pop songs. The Scarecrow, The Gnome. You got some crazy songs like Pow R Talk H or whatever. I don't even know what that song's called. Interstellar Overdrive is trippy as heck. Yeah, that's my third favorite album of all time. Number 2 is a by a band that you just don't hear much about in the vinyl community. It's Genesis, Selling England by the Pound. That's me being ironic. The vinyl community talks about Genesis all the time, and I know there are certain ones that don't even like them. I know there's ones in the vinyl community that don't like them. Andrew, the inspiration for this whole process, I know doesn't like Genesis, and I think some of the praise has kind of, but whatever. Back when I was introduced to Genesis, nobody was listening to the Peter Gabriel stuff. Like, that's something that I think maybe my generation that kind of came upon it in our teens, which is actually a couple decades after it came out, or a decade or so after it came out. We just voiced our enthusiasm louder than others, and now they're one of those bands that has become embraced in certain communities, but they couldn't get arrested back then, other than certain areas. I know this album sold very well in Italy. It sold okay in the UK, but the Peter Gabriel Years of Genesis was not a big sell, and critics hated him at the time. So what can I say? This is everything I look for in an album. I mean, there are certain days where this would be my number 1 album. It's got everything I like. I with my sort of ADD, musical ADD, where I can't stay focused, this is perfect because it just goes through so many different feelings. The album opens with Peter Gabriel's voice unaccompanied in Dancing with the Moonlit Night. You get a pastoral sort of kind of acoustic-based progressive rock song to open. Then it goes into I Know What I Like in Your Wardrobe, which is a whimsical pop ditty that with a hooky chorus. Then into Firth the Fifth, which starts with some very classical piano that sounds just as good as any classical music you'd ever be exposed to. It gets downright anthemic, and then Steve Hackett's amazing guitar playing, unequaled. It goes beyond just being fast and flashy. It's just such an amazing composition, followed up by a ballad with Phil Collins on vocals, which, these days a Phil Collins ballad, or at least into the 90s, a Phil Collins ballad meant overproduced and kind of sappy, but this isn't. This is a very simple acoustic melody. You got the Battle of Epping Forest following that, which is a crazy progressive rock song that sounds like, like Pink Floyd meets the Beatles meets Monty Python. It's weird and it's crazy, and it takes a few listens to appreciate. The first time you hear it, you'll think it's the most annoying song you've ever heard, and then it grows on you. After the Ordeal is a beautiful instrumental, and then it culminates with the cinema show Isle of Plenty, which is basically progressive rock 101, and it just has the most amazing kind of instrumental portion featuring primarily Phil on drums, Mike on bass, and Tony on keys. Hackett's there on guitar as well, but those three are really the highlights of that song. And then the album ends the way it started, with Peter's singing and Phil's harmonies. I think they're singing a grocery list in the round, and it's wonderful. So that is my second favorite album of all time, Genesis, Selling England by the pound. If you avoid it because you just don't think you like progressive rock, if you avoid it because the vinyl community's talked about it too much, if the hype kind of bugs you, whatever, just give it a shot. Listen to it with an open mind. I think there's a chance you may embrace it as much as I do. So that's my number 2 album. And now here we are. It's been a year of talking about it, and we are here with my favorite album of all time. This album is another one that doesn't need a lot of introduction. It was released in 1987. Debbie Gibson's Out of the Blue. It's just an amazing... I'm a jerk. Actually, you know what? I spun this a little while ago. It's not that bad. It's a decent little pop album. Anyways, sorry. Number 1, released August 17th, 1959. It is Miles Davis, Kind of Blue. Not his most adventurous album. He's put out so many other things. I'm kind of... as I review my list, should In a Silent Way have been on the list? Should Bitches Brew have been on the list? Yeah, probably. He has so many great albums, but I just never get tired of this. And, I say it's not his most adventurous, it's not his most avant-garde or anything like that, but it does evoke so many different moods and feelings. There are some mellow and beautiful moments, but there are also some hyperactive, spazzy moments that get me excited. I find it very hard to put this album on and like, for example, if on Spotify or on my iPod or something, if I'm listening to shuffle and say this album comes up, or a song from this album comes up, well, I can't leave it at that. I've always got to, I end up listening to the whole album every time. 5 songs: So What, Freddie Freeloader, Blue and Green, All Blues, Flamenco Sketches, Miles Davis on trumpet, and of course he's the leader, Julian Adderley on alto sax, John Coltrane on tenor sax, Wynton Kelly on piano, Bill Evans on piano, Paul Chambers on bass, James Cobb on drums. If you haven't heard it, I'm sure you've heard it. I'm sure everybody's heard this one. Truly just a masterpiece as far as I'm concerned. So there you got it. My top 10 albums of all time. Miles Davis, Kinda Blue at number 1. Thanks you for sticking with me all this time. I will, as time permits, I will try to put out some more videos throughout the course of the year. I don't think I'm going to follow any strict themes or anything for the most part. I'm just going to kind of do some more spins and finds and whatever. That's the plan anyways. So we'll see how it goes. Until next time, I am Bobby B. Liner Notes on YouTube, The Vinyl Vagabond on Instagram. Follow me, and thank you again for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.